It is about time to start our session, sixth session on climatic changes and the environment. I think it is about time. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here with us at this fantastic theater. I'd like to thank the organizers. Finally, we have a wonderful meeting with outstanding experts. And I think this is a subject that is a concern for all of us citizens. Here in Spain and worldwide, we are deeply concerned. Are we able to have a fruitful debate about our future, not only regarding what we'll have to do to have a better future for all, but also what science will contribute? Because there is a level of uncertainty. When we pay attention to what the media are saying, we we are at a unique moment where we have scientists, politicians, decision makers, citizens, and this is the way to solve problems concerning us and future generations. This is why it is so important to scientists, politicians should get together to convey a message in an effective way, in a clear-cut way to all citizens. This is what we're going to try to do this afternoon, and we do hope you get the sound also through the internet. We are focused on a subject that is one of the most important problems. Lots of papers, riots of ink. We have seen lots of people, and they are here. And I'd like to thank you now for the light. We're going to see that we're going to have a protocol, political actions to fight against climatic changes. And we're going to analyze different viewpoints, perhaps a bit more pessimistic. Data on the summit were not hopeful at the very end moment of the presence of the United States, where the Commission, the commitment for reducing emissions and the presence of China were very important to reach an agreement. But the truth is that there are very many citizens who are still thinking about the fact, is it correct or not? And isn't it the moment to say, it's enough, we need a joint effort, we need actions. We would like the decision makers to implement actions based on data, scientific data, and technological robust data. This is why in this moment we have scientists, we have experts, real milestones in different fields. Needless to say that all of them are outstanding experts. We do not need then to make an introduction. You have the website, you have all the information, you can download the information from the internet. And I would like just to mention names, and then you can know them better according to what they're going to say. Mr. Robert Socolow from Princeton University, it's an expert who's going to analyze what technology and science can do for us to stabilize CO2 emission into the atmosphere. To my right, Professor Hartmut Michael. We have Nobel Prize laureate in the field of chemistry, and in the last few years Professor Hartmut Michael has presented the way to tackle energy problems in a special way, biofuels mainly. And then we have to my left Emigdia Repetto from Las Palmas University, full professor in the field of didactic techniques. She is a professor of professors. She is training the trainers. Are we training the professors in the proper way? Are we training them in the field of the environmental sciences in a proper way? Professor Takashi Asano from Stanford, California, and it is the greatest expert in the field of water resources, and I am honored to welcome Professor Asano, as well as all the professors. Water as resources, it's very important because there could be conflicts, but also civilizations due to good management of water resources. Here we have from the High Council of Scientific Research, Mr. José Luis Rubio. We're talking about Earth, we're talking about planet Earth, we're talking about fire, we're talking about water, we're talking about resources, and it is very important to analyze climatic changes. And here we have the president of Climate Change Project in Spain, one of the real pillars of dissemination of knowledge in Spain for just presenting the message of climatic changes and to have a debate with those who are skeptical and who think that the problem is not important. And let's talk about the importance of climatic changes. From now on, we're going to start now. That was just a short introduction, and I apologize because I've asked some questions from them, and let's open the question with the same question for all of the participants. What do we expect as scientists, as citizens, as people concerned about the environment? How about the convention that will take place within 1 week at Copenhagen? What could we ask from politicians? What will we be satisfied with? Juan Verde, president of the Climate Change Project Spain, has the floor. Mr. Verde, you have the floor. Good morning to you all. Thank you. I'd like to thank the organizers for this opportunity which is given to me. And I think that Copenhagen is the last great chance we have in order to think about growth, to get a way out of a crisis, and to think about a better world for all of us with an economic and energetic or model that will be different and better for all of us. It's different from Kyoto. Here we have three pillars, three reasons for optimism. Firstly, that as here in the case of Copenhagen, the scientific debate is closed. That was not the case when protocol was signed in Kyoto. I think we have evidence now. It is a robust scientific evidence no one can deny. On the other hand, and now the United States, they are going to play a different role. So and nowadays that's very important because we've moved on from a different situation. The former president was denying scientific evidence and he was not considering climate change was a big concern for all mankind. And now President Obama has the will of ratifying the protocol in Copenhagen, but he is going to become the leader of the international community towards a new revolution, the green revolution, a new step forward. And thirdly, third pillar, and nowadays we have a social demand that did not exist before because we have different people and concerned by climate change as a big problem for the society, but men are accelerating the process. So politicians, they'll have to understand that society is ready to tackle the problem, ready to penalize or ready to reward what's been achieved or not in the field. Professor Socolow, you are a scientist and you've worked among many fields in the field of CO2 emissions. You're concerned by the information at a summit like Copenhagen. What are you expecting? What about a contribution for a person like you from the summit in Copenhagen? Would you kindly elaborate about your expectations?
Okay. Greetings, everyone, and it's wonderful to have this conversation this morning and to be together in this as we're learning about an incredibly difficult challenge. I think the most important thing in thinking about Copenhagen is not to expect that the world will suddenly understand this problem and understand what to do. The most important outcome is that there be another meeting after this one, and that it not be somehow a closed-ended process. Let me explain that in 1992, the world took the first step toward dealing with climate change. The meeting was in Rio de Janeiro. It resulted in a political framework for dealing with climate change with an end date of 2012. It was a 20-year plan. And what's going on in Copenhagen is the thinking about the next step, the next few decades. In 1992, the structure of that agreement put the world into two different groups of countries. The group of countries that Spain and the United States are part of was called Annex 1. And it was roughly the same set of countries that are called industrialized countries, or the OECD. It actually included Russia, but it's about half of the world's emissions. In those days, more than half. Today, the OECD is responsible for only half of the world's emissions. The other half of the world was told, there's nothing you have to do now. We have to get ourselves organized. We will be attacking the problem, we in the Annex 1 countries. When we have ourselves organized, then we will ask you to join us. The framing of the problem now is completely different. And the reason this is so difficult is not only because the United States has been an obstacle, and now we will not be an obstacle. But we should not pretend that that was the only problem. The starting point was that we thought of the world in two camps. Now the other camp, the developing countries, are suddenly being told, join us, come on quick. No more second-class citizenship. And they're resisting, understandably. This is happening extremely quickly, and it is not being uniformly expressed. So the most important thing that will be happening at Copenhagen, in my view, is an understanding that we're all the countries of the world have to deal with this problem together. The leadership should come from Europe and the United States and Japan, for sure. But the problem is no longer being discussed as one set of countries now, the rest of the countries later. But we all have to do this together, starting in Copenhagen.
Thank you. I'd like to get viewpoints from all of you. Perhaps would you like to take the floor, or shall I ask other questions? Please, Mr. Rubio. Good morning to you all, and thank you for this opportunity which is given to me. And I fully agree with what has been said by Professor Socolow. We have no sound. Sorry. Please use the microphone. Micrófono, por favor, que no está usted utilizando el micrófono. Por favor, micrófono. I think that you're not using the microphone. Be so kind as to use one microphone. Now it's open. Thank you. I was saying that in Copenhagen a few weeks ago, till a few weeks ago, there were negative aspects. But now China and the United States, thanks to that new attitude, we have new expectations. It's a step forward because what's been proposed by the United States should be ratified at the Congress. And China, the level of proposal is for the immediate short term and then mid-term. But of course, references are dated back in 2005. But that's a good step forward. But I think that negotiations worldwide, according to international diplomacy, negotiations are taking place in a very slow way. It's very slow, and time is lacking. We have signs and symptoms that are frequently witnessed. Climatic change is here, and we'll have to react now. An example of signs from planet Earth is that November we had like springtime here in Spain. We have seen flowers, we've seen anomalies in phenologic rhythms and that are reiterated, but the international agenda takes it slowly, and it's a real pity. But I think that countries or regions that are concerned should get together and react now. There are global changes, emissions from United Nations or China will concern us, and I think that we'll have to start now working together at the level of the Mediterranean or even within Spain, considering, for instance, adaptation of the territory, which is something to start now. Yes, good morning to you all. I, by nature, am very optimistic. And then I think that we can have very important things as an outcome from Copenhagen, because as the previous speakers have stated, society's got awareness. It's taken time because of the problem of a greenhouse effect, which is not new. At the end of 19th century, we were informed by Arrhenius of consequences of CO2 emissions, but the truth is that as Kyoto Protocol has been difficult to accept by all countries. Now there is a big step forward, and it's been acknowledged. That's positive. There are measures against deterioration of the ozone layer, and I think that stemming from Copenhagen, we could have something able to counteract what we're witnessing. We are at the sort of Anthropocene, yes. Well, we need other statements. Would you kindly tell us what your personal viewpoints are regarding the summit? Professor Michael, would you kindly comment on this? Professor Helmut Michael.
So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to express my views here. From the Copenhagen meeting, I mainly expect measurements to reduce the consumption of fossil fuels, which leads, of course, to the generation of carbon dioxide. But on the other hand, I belong to the people who are getting more and more skeptics of whether carbon dioxide is really the culprit for the global warming. If you look into the climate history, every 110,000 years you have a global warming, which comes, and a few thousand years later, it decreases. And most of the time in history, the global temperature was 6 centigrade below us, and the upper limits were always 2 centigrade above us. And this repeats every 110,000 years. The other point is, if I look as a chemist at the spectra of carbon dioxide and the spectra of the sunlight and so on, I get doubts whether, and it will be Professor Socolow to convince me that this attribution of the global warming to carbon dioxide is really correct, or it is a hypothesis. For me, for the moment, it is a hypothesis. If we look for the greenhouse gases, it's no doubt that water vapor is the most important greenhouse gas. If you look up the literature, carbon dioxide contributes between 9 and 26% only, according to the different literature. There are other greenhouse gases which I think have to be considered. That's nitrous oxide, that's methane, and of course carbon dioxide. But on the other hand, carbon dioxide, we should reduce the carbon dioxide concentration, but it's mainly not to consume our fossil fuels, because fossil fuels are very precious. Future generations will need them, and it's not only the climate, it's also what concerns me is the economical distribution of wealth. We pay other countries lots of money for fossil fuels, for petrol, and this gives then these countries, like the Arab countries or Russia, lots of economic power, not only economical power, also political power, and this is not a good situation, and this is another reason why we should really work for the reduction of the consumption of fossil fuels.
Professor Socolow, there was a question. Would you kindly react on that? You'll have to convince Mr. Helmut Michael that CO2 is so important for climatic changes.
It's interesting to imagine doing this in a conversation of this kind, but I will say a few things. First, at the most fundamental level, we human beings are getting a message that we aren't particularly happy to hear. We are living on a small planet relative to our own human exuberance, our excitement, what we want to do with our lives. The planet used to be so large that we could not as we went about our lives for all the time that human beings have been on this planet, we could not make changes of the planet on the planetary scale. But at some point, since the planet is not that large, and we are a lot of people with a lot of desires, we will become large enough to make planetary change. Once you hear that, you say, it can't be true. That time hasn't come yet, really. We don't want that. We want to be able to do everything we can think of. All of us tell all the people who are poorer than we that they can live exactly the way we can. That's the world we'd like to have. But it isn't the world we actually live on. The message is actually a very sad message at one level. We have to figure out something we never had to worry about before. How do we fit on this planet? So when I hear that someone wants to believe that carbon dioxide is not important in making a planetary change, and carbon dioxide has come from burning coal and oil and gas, and we keep doing it, and we're going to do more of it if we don't take special efforts, I say the person is shooting the messenger. You know the phrase, shooting the messenger. If I hear something I don't like to hear, my first goal is to attack the person who's telling me. But if it's true, then we've got to act accordingly. There is an effect of carbon dioxide building up in the atmosphere. It can be compared to the other gases quantitatively. Methane is the second most important gas. Water vapor is certainly in the picture in a very big way because it amplifies the other signals. So one more reason for reducing the amount of fossil fuel emission is because there really is climate change coming from that. But I'm happy to have you in favor of reducing fossil fuel emissions because of geopolitical reasons, because then we come up with the same answer. As long as we come up with the same answer, I'm not going to try to convince you of an extra reason for agreeing with me. But I think the underlying understanding of why so many people want this not to be true, and the United States is full of people in the politics and in the science community who are telling the world this isn't right. Unfortunately, it is right. And we have, therefore, to act accordingly. We have lots of ways. I said it was sad a moment ago, but it's also exciting because there are many ways, difficult ways, new ways of learning how to live on this planet, 8 or 9 billion of us, all of us with aspirations, what we want to do while we're alive. We want to see other countries. We want to have electronics at home. We want to have a nice house. We want to do all kinds of things. How are we going to make this all happen on a planet that isn't that large? We're not going to have all the answers for several generations. All of you in the room are going to deal with this. It's in fact our fate at the most basic level.
Si hay algo en lo que se demuestra que
something that proves that planet is small is in water resources. And we haven't had the opportunity of getting information from Professor Asano, and I'd like Professor Asano to describe what's happening with water in our planet Earth. I'd like to ask you to take the floor. There is no churns. Please, this is important to be proactive, to have a debate, and probably in other domains we won't have this opportunity, but that's going to happen. And you have the floor. Mr. Asano, you have the floor, sir.
First, may I correct my affiliation? I am with the University of California at Davis campus. I'm not a Stanford professor. And also, I happen to be an engineer. So I'm dealing with pretty much in the consequence of whatever happens. And particularly, I think my area would be the flooding event and also prolonged drought event. So this is my starting point, and I am not really qualified to get into detail of atmospheric science and other consequences. But as a result of that, as an engineer, we have to deal with this problem, and I have some observations and the proposals in a later. Not listening? So, again, just to repeat very quickly, I am a professor emeritus of the University of California at Davis, not at Stanford, as written in a program. But I happen to be an engineer. As a result of that, I would like to deal with the consequence of global warming, and that particularly with respect to drought and also the flood conditions. And I would like to elaborate this aspect of it a little bit later. Thank you.
Muy bien, pues vamos a profundizar si les parece.
We're about to elaborate on that. Well, raise your hands, and now we're going to start a debate about what Mr. Sokolov's mentioned. This is a small country where we'll have all to act at the same time. And what we see here is that is not probable that we could fight against climate changes from a developed world, telling developing countries to follow strategies they haven't complied with. Perhaps Mr. Sokolov would like to elaborate on that. Stabilization of CO2 emissions in the future wouldn't lead us to what's been said, that people will in the future will have the level of emissions that they have as a developing country nowadays. That's very important. Would you kind of elaborate on that for the future, sir?
Well, I think what you're asking me to do is to put a list forward of the kinds of changes that can be made in the modern economy that will be responsive to this news that the carbon dioxide is a problem in the atmosphere. So we are now putting 30 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere every year. If you divide by the world's population, that's about 4 tons of carbon dioxide per year from each person on average. Now, people can go to the computer today and find out their personal footprint when they describe how many miles or kilometers they travel in vehicles, what size house they live in, what they buy, and you can find out your personal footprint. Spain's average per capita emissions are probably close to 10 tons of carbon dioxide a year, twice the world average. And for you as individuals, it depends a lot on how much money you have, how old you are, but on average you're going to be 10. Now you're doing that by your driving, you're taking a bus, not on a bicycle. There will be no carbon dioxide there. And of course, what you eat and its consequences. So we're talking about everyday life. Now, if we're going to stop using as much of the fossil fuels that we have, there are a limited number of ways we can do something about that. One is to use the sun, and Spain has some remarkable experimental programs, research, to be able to substitute solar energy for fossil fuels. Another is nuclear energy, which I think we may want to discuss together, which also doesn't have carbon emissions, but it is a kind of technology that is making people quite uncomfortable, and we have to think about how to make that better. Another is energy efficiency, so that when you do heat your home, for example, you use much less energy to do so than we do today, because we built the house better or we fixed it up. And then there are also the questions of lifestyle. What do we actually enjoy doing? And what, for example, there's a lot of travel that people do in businesses. They don't even want to do it. They'd rather stay home. And with better communication and video conference, you can displace some kinds of travel that aren't wanted at all. All of these can be discussed quantitatively, and we have an immense job turning the current economy, which is based on fossil fuels. 85% of the basic energy in the world comes from coal, oil, and gas. And turning that around so that, say, in 50 years, it's 15%. We haven't learned how to do that, and we have to start.
And all strategies, what is transcendent here is the idea that the only way to tackle the problem is to reduce the problem, to diminish the problem. But there are other scientists proposing that a good approach to climatic changes is to get adapted to climatic changes. And on the one hand, it's technically answering the problem, and another thing is getting adapted to global warming. There is a scientific debate also, and I think, Professor Asano, that in the world of water resources, it is important to have this dichotomy if we want to fight against the scarcity of water, or shall we get adapted thanks to engineering and techniques to this water scarcity?
One thing I think,
Lack of water.
for the time being, I think obviously water resources is an issue. But it's not only the quantity of water, but also water quality of it. So this is a very important one, and particularly when you deal with the water quality, that is a very important consequences. And technology, we have to discuss about that. But those are there at this moment. We can produce, for example, sewage water. They purified it such a way that you can even drink that particular water. So we have a range of technologies available, and particularly technologies such as membrane processes, for example. So I think we can put the priorities in this direction. We can produce water. And one consequence, which I would like to just discuss a little bit of the big picture, is in Spain also, but in California in particular, that you develop the water resources in long distance areas, such as mountainous areas in Northern California. And you're bringing that water all the way down to, let's say, mega city in desert, such as Los Angeles or San Diego. And if you think about that distance, we are talking about almost like collecting snow melt water in Switzerland, trying to bring into Madrid. That is the distance we are doing. And that was almost like 40 years ago, 45 years ago, we have developed that. Now we are really facing these consequences of some of the environmental issues, ecology issues, and so forth. So this is a kind of a problem you're going to have if you have extreme weather patterns, which may be predicted from the global warming and others. So the drought is one area, and the flooding is another one. So I think we have to deal with these the issues related to social issues, environmental justice issue, and all of those are all related to this global warming issues.
Sí. Bueno, yo creo que no se debería plantear.
I think that we shouldn't say there is a dichotomy, that we'll have to make a choice to fight against or to get adapted to. I think that we should work on both items, and a reduction, gas reduction is a priority, is a must, and ecological efficiency is a need, and we have general changes, changing personal attitudes and changing also the way mankind is getting related with the environment. That implies a revolution, that implies changing behaviors and a better relationship with the environment. But I think at the same time we have to get adapted mainly in very sensitive territories, vulnerable territories. Water resources are key issues, but there are elements that are forgotten. Soil is an important element in both senses, biological items. That's important because soil degradation implies emission of greenhouse gases like, for instance, methane and nitrogen or nitrous oxide. So it is very important. There are climatic changes implying desertification, and those soils are emitting more CO2. But there are also not only environmental but human and social and economic reasons. Only 13% of the surface is prone to agricultural activities. If not, we have slope, or we have low temperatures or too high temperatures, or there is flooding, or they're too far away. Only 13% of the surface of the earth is able to give crops to give food for 9 billion people, only 13% with unlimited capacity. So we have connotations regarding soil degradation and regarding human and environmental aspects. And that is an unknown factor. I'd like to take this opportunity of the Campus of Excellence to announce that at the campus we have a presentation of a book published that is the result of a symposium that took place 2 years ago at Fuerteventura with another meeting that took place in Madrid. And here there is a statement, a manifesto with the commitment of all participants. The book was published thanks to the interest of José Ramón Calvo and thanks to José Regidor, rector of the University of Las Palmas at the Canary Islands. And that's a milestone, a reference book, a contribution from the Campus of Excellence where we have contributions from scientists, a very prestigious contribution in all cases, analyzing the situation, consequences regarding poverty, regarding hunger, regarding conflicts due to migrations and so on. So the fact of working in reducing emissions is important, but working on those phenomena is extremely important, and I'd like to quote what we say, that we have to solve problems down to earth, and it is very important controlling soil quality. And we have myths, realities and solutions. We are given solutions, technical solutions, engineering solutions to stabilize CO2 emissions, to keep water resources, to improve soil quality, but we need energy consumption, biofuels, and Don Juan Verde had something to do about it. Would you like to elaborate on that, Mr. Verde? Yes, I'll take this opportunity. We're talking about myths and realities as well as solutions, and I'm going to be down to earth, and I'm not going to be politically correct. I do not think there are doubts, no doubts on that, on what the International panel and the IPCC panel on climatic change stated, and I'd like to state clearly something on that. I think that scientific evidence is there, is here to stay, and no one who's really sane would this take. But the global aspect is that Al Gore, former Vice President, mentioned climate changes, and he said that the situation, lack of water in Africa, we have the migration flows of millions of people going from the central part of Africa, going into littoral areas, and we see also thousands of people trying to migrate, boat people trying to get into Spain. There is a global problem there. Migration flows due to poverty. There is no ideological aspect there. It concerns all of us, and I think that scientific community should clarify doubts, but at the same time get solutions. And I'd like to talk about it with all of you. We have outstanding experts here. I'd like them to elaborate on the feasibility several technologies like carbon sequestration. Perhaps Mr. Socolow could talk about it, but I think that we have also Mr. Herman Michael, perhaps, and I'd like to say something that's not related to it. It's a very short contribution. Perhaps Don Juan, something characterizing science is that we need to have doubts on things to be able to try to give an answer. When you have doubts, it's very important. You have curiosity, you try to find an answer. I think it's very important. And now we have Mr. Herman Michael.
Let me say that 2 years ago, I was a believer. I'm dealing more and more with it, and I'm getting skeptical. No, that is my point. And if I see various calculations, and there are calculations now, it's only 0.1 degree global warming for the moment, and there are then the official calculations varying between 2 and 8 degrees. So there's a huge margin of uncertainty, even in the IPCC, various IPCC models. So this is very clear. But I fully agree that we should reduce carbon dioxide emissions. And if we then look for what can be done, it's very clear that reducing, getting a better insulation of houses is the most important point. That is in the cold climate where you need less heating, or it's in the hot countries where you need less for air conditioning. When you look for energy sources, of course, we have renewable energy, we have wind energy, we have solar energy. Solar energy, without any doubt, is the most promising one, and especially in Spain, you are very happy. You can have photovoltaic cells, you can have the solar thermal energy, and you may know that in Germany we have a big initiative that about 300 times 300 square kilometers of the Sahara Desert can be used to supply all the electric energy for Germany. And this is a thing which Germany will go for, and the cost will be affordable when you compare it with the money which went into saving the banking system of the German banking system. So there's a clear point that this will be viable. The other issue which has been addressed is wind energy. Wind energy is very good, and when the wind is blowing strong, it's a very efficient means. But you have to be careful with selecting the places, because the energy harvest goes with a cube to the wind strength. So if you have double the wind strength, you can harvest 8-fold amount of energy. So it's very important to have the right places for adequate. Spain is probably very lucky in Galicia. You have very good places. You have good places for harvesting the sun in Andalusia, and this is how we have to go on. I was a photosynthesis researcher. I dealt a lot with biofuels. And biofuels is a very inefficient means. So the energy which is stored from the sun in the biofuel is less than 0.1%. You have to put in at least 50% of the energy. So it's 1/2000th of the sun's energy, which is actually net storage in the biofuel. And the storage for that is very, very expensive. And what is not considered quite often, you need a huge amount of water. So 1 liter of biodiesel in Germany consumes 14,000 liters of water. And if you consider the water consumption for biofuel production, it's economically and ecologically unsafe. We should not go into biofuels, in my opinion. What investment should be done in getting better engines, for instance, what is not known, for instance, most people don't know that only 20% of the energy in the gasoline is used for the propulsion of the car, and 80% goes directly into heat. So if we get engines which convert 30% into propelling the car, we only need half of gasoline. So this is really a challenge. So a challenge for the engineer to get better machinery for energy conversion.
La profesora Repetto había pedido la palabra y también el señor Socolow. Pues,
sí.
¿quieren?
Es que hasta ahora estamos hablando de cómo producir energía. Y yo quería cambiar de tercio y decir cómo podemos hacer que consumamos menos energía. Y en eso entraría la formación del ciudadano, ¿no? La formación del...
No sé, se sigue sin oír, parece ser. Póngase, por favor, un poquito más allá y si no, le pasamos el micro. Ahora.
¿Ahora sí?
Ya está, Faustino.
Bueno, empiezo.
Well, I'm going to start. Well, we're going to talk on how to use less energy, and then this would involve the citizens' training. Citizens are convinced that the climate change is a problem, and they point at it as the fourth global problem after poverty, famine, and wars. We have already won in this area because we already have the citizens' awareness. So for me, it is very important to educate citizens. But as we are dealing with the idea of permanent training throughout the whole life, I'm not just referring to formal or academic education with curricula, different disciplines, etc., but I'm also referring to informal education through events such as this one, through museums, and even through neighborhood associations. When we talk about education, I would like to say that the family is very important in children's education, because after all, ever since the child is born, he or she is in touch with environmental education, because environmental education is just the relationships with ourselves and between ourselves and the environment. So, in my opinion, it is very important to raise awareness, especially amongst the students who are listening to us, because the youngsters are going to be the politicians or researchers in the future. They should be aware about the importance of education. In this regard, for example, there are many people who don't know anything about how the climate change has taken place, because they have heard alone in the media or they have read, but they cannot assimilate what they read, and they continue to blame the climate change on the ozone layer. Well, there are recent studies based on surveys carried out amongst Spanish citizens on the greenhouse effect. Just 12% of them, of the citizens, attribute the climate change to this, to the greenhouse effect. Others blame that, the climate change, on other factors. I don't think it is a question of scientific education. It's an education based on attitudes. Of course, attitudes are based on the results of scientific research. And this for a simple reason, because if you don't believe in a problem, you don't try to do anything, you don't try to solve it. So this is the first thing we should do. In the 21st century, there are lots of people who believe that electricity is a clean energy because they just see the product, but they don't know how electricity is generated. And in this regard, the UNESCO recommended to establish the decade of education for a sustainable future, which started in 2005 and will finish in 2014. There are numerous university professors and teachers who are involved in non-university, non-academic education in order, as I said, to create attitudes in order to achieve action, commitments into actions, because debating or discussing is all right, but if this is not materialized in a commitment, we won't see any results. For example, there are the green homes, and a lot of work is being done in this area, not just with recycling and reuse of materials, but also through saving energy. Yesterday somebody talked about gender, or mentioned gender issues, and although more men have knowledge about the aspects involved in the climate change, women, after all, are those who undertake specific action. And for example, something which is so unimportant to some as the electricity bill, well, they take action in order to save energy and to have a smaller figure in their bills. Yes, sustainable future. Well, one of the questions asked by citizens to themselves and the scientists is if there is a real, we can expect today that we can expect to stop climate change without having developed countries to give up their prosperity. When I am asking this question to Professor Socolow, it is not just a question of giving up minimum well-being, but just using a car to travel some distances, to have their holidays and enjoy their leisure, and without giving up prosperity, yet being at the same time respectful with the environment through diminishing CO2 emissions. Is that a possibility today?
There's quite a few things that were said that I wanted to say, but let me say it's a 50-year proposition to develop the technologies that will let us live the way we do today with much, much less impact on the global atmosphere. It's not going to happen overnight. And that makes us, we are not yet realistic about the amount of climate change we're probably going to bring about when we consider how quickly we really are willing to change institutions and technologies. And I wanted to directly address what Professor Michel has had to say about, in the framing of risk assessment. The climate scientists do not know how bad climate change will be. And I think that may be what you're reflecting upon. There's a lot of uncertainty about feedback between the forests and the climate, between ice and the climate, ocean currents and the climate. There are many problems that we just don't understand well. Clouds is another one. And so it is correct that we could be lucky and the climate change would not be very serious. That is consistent with what we know. But on the other hand, we could be worse off than even the more dramatic changes that we are talking about. We are talking about taking risks and deciding how much effort to spend reducing those risks. And that's a hard question, but we do it in our ordinary lives. We decide on how much to spend on a car that's a little more safe than another car. We do all kinds of decisions that are related to running risks in our ordinary lives, and businesses do the same thing. How much money to put away for our future, and in case things go bad in our own personal future. We make those decisions all the time. We don't decide that we're going to be lucky. None of us runs our life according to the assumption that we'll be lucky, except when we're about 3 years old. So then that is the why I think you can talk about there might be a 1/10 of a degree Celsius change in the climate. Yes, there might. Well, that's way at one end. But more likely, it's going to be a couple of degrees for where we are today, and it could conceivably be much worse than that. And only gradually we're going to learn our way. So we have to take action in the face of uncertainty. I am very glad that people mentioned adaptation, and the fact that and I agree completely with you, Professor Rubio, that it is adaptation and mitigation have to both be conducted together. And adaptation is especially for the people who are a good deal poorer than us in Europe, for example, in Africa, which I've never been quite so close to Africa as you guys are. And right across the Mediterranean, you have some of the poorest people of the world. And they will be very vulnerable to climate change. What is happening in Spain on behalf of those people? What could we be doing so that they get warning of a drought that's coming? They get warning of a flood that's coming. There is an enormous job ahead of us to raise the capability of poor people to not be wiped out by a natural event like a storm. And that is a program, again, for the young people in this room. This is your next 50 years. There shouldn't be, by the end of those 50 years, anybody who's going to be wiped out by a storm. And today there are billions of people in that category. Juan, you asked me to discuss carbon dioxide capture and storage, which we haven't mentioned yet, and which is one of the interesting technologies. When you burn something, you get energy from it. When you burn gasoline in your engine, you get energy from it, or you burn coal in a power plant. The carbon dioxide is going to the atmosphere today, but that's a separate step. It doesn't have to go to the atmosphere. You've already got the energy out. We use the atmosphere as our garbage pail because it's easiest, cheapest thing to do. But in principle, we can capture the carbon dioxide, not let it go to the atmosphere, and put it somewhere else. In particular, people talk about putting it down deep in the earth and put it there more or less forever. The power will be more expensive if we do it that way. So that's an extra cost, which we could afford if the climate change will be less, because we do that. So all over the United States and Europe today, there is discussion. Let's move along in that direction. We can't get away from fossil fuels instantly. Let's try to go through a transition in which we burn coal and natural gas in power plants, capture the carbon dioxide, put it below ground, not to the exclusion of other things, not to the exclusion of renewables and efficiency, but as one of the things that we do. It will work. It will work, and we'll learn our way into it. There's a lot of resistance. Partly people are saying, we thought we'd get rid of fossil fuels overnight. If you do this, you won't get rid of them overnight. I would argue you won't get rid of them overnight anyway, so take this on as one of the transition strategies. It's a fascinating idea that Professor Michel was talking about, of making solar energy in North Africa, in the Sahara, and bringing it across the Mediterranean to Spain and the rest of Europe. And something exactly analogous is available in the United States, where we have a desert south of our border and on both sides of our southern border with northern Mexico. Very large renewable energy complexes that produce electricity and send them into the more populated areas. Both projects could get underway now. Again, extra cost compared to what it costs right now. The problem is fossil fuels are cheap, and they are going to stay cheap unless we add extra cost to them that is done by governments with our permission. We don't vote the politicians out of office if they put on such charges. And then we will have opportunities to do quite a few things with energy that we aren't doing right now. Fossil fuels are going to stay cheap if we don't put policies in place that make them less competitive. And we're not going to do that until people are willing to pay more for their electricity and their gasoline and so forth. And that will require the ordinary person believing that climate change needs to be dealt with. It all comes back to political will, which comes back to people's attitudes and education. We are all talking about the same thing in this room.
Sí. Profesor Rubio, yo recuerdo que tenemos un pequeño retraso.
Well, we have some delay, so now we are going to give the floor to the audience immediately. Would you like to say anything? Well, apart from the details concerning processes and scientific uncertainty, which does exist, and very seriously so, I think that there are some underlying problems or issues. And with regards to those, the issue of climate change is positive because it is absolutely necessary that humankind changes its way, its lifestyle. We are wasting energy. There was a time in which energy was free and abundant, and we continue to believe that, and we're behaving in a neglecting and irrespectful way towards nature. We are in a growth pattern which is endless, and I agree with Professor Socolow that atmosphere doesn't have an endless ability to take those emissions. Water doesn't have permanent, endless resistance to emissions, etc. With soil, it is the same thing. And yes, in front of the evidence of a climate change, what we need to do is to change attitudes. And we should consider nature as something endless. The positive part is that the climate change is obliging us to have a much deeper knowledge about the natural systems or wild systems. During the first day, it was said that change is usual for mankind. There is a statement by Plato which states that the only permanent thing is change that is always permanent. So there is climate change, which is related to personal attitudes in citizens. And I hope, and I want to be optimistic, that this crisis will lead us to a better relationship with the environment. Professor Rubio is optimistic. Actually, he recently wrote that desertization is a curable disease. I don't know if we are all so optimistic, Professor Asano, when we talk about water scarcity, which may result in numerous conflicts in the future. And I read that you said that water resource losses is much more serious than losses of oil. I don't know if you agree with Professor Rubio, and if the audience wants to ask questions, we'll give the floor to you, audience.
Thank you. I think with respect to the water resources issue, particularly in a drought situation, the immediate possible technology is this. We have to treat wastewater to protect the environment. This is the municipal wastewater treatment technology. But if you put a little bit more energy or technology into this process, you can create the new water, let's say, blue new water. And this is a way I think we had to deal with, that we brought a long distance. I mentioned about taking water from Switzerland all the way down to Madrid. We have already water resources right at the doorstep of the municipality. That is a sewage water, used water. If you can purify this water or reclaim this water and recycling it, you have already water resources right at the municipality. So with respect to energy consumption, with respect to the sustainability, you should be using your wastewater with a technology such a way that is safe and sustainable. And particularly with respect to agricultural type applications, most of the water resources we talk about in the semi-arid environment, almost 60%, 70% of water resources are used for irrigation or agricultural-related activities. Now, this water can be replaced with the reclaimed, recycled wastewater. Some of them still have nitrogen and phosphorus, which is a very important nutrients. And that can be used for, particularly in a landscape irrigation, such as golf courses, greens, schoolyard, parks, and so forth. So this will be my immediate, let's say, proposal for under that kind of situation. We do have water resources, but we do have a problem with the water quality. And if you include the water quality, then it would become water resources with economic value. So this is my immediate proposal to remedy some of the extreme consequences, such as drought.
You have been dealing with a topic which is very tricky in Spain, as you know, Professor Asano, the water issue, water uses. Scientists believe that there is no water scarcity, but just bad distribution of water. And the proposal you made, which is reusing water, that requires creating very large infrastructures, for example, and also to retain water in dams, and etc., and to change the streams or the course of the rivers. But this is not very well accepted by citizens. What is your opinion about it?
Well, I think I can give you the very difficult example. California did that about 40, 50 years ago. And now we are facing very serious environmental consequences of transporting water for long distance. And I mentioned about distance from Switzerland to Madrid. So I think we have to be much more efficient in terms of water use. The conservation is very important. and also creating new water using wastewater, which is already you brought those water to the municipality. Water is right there. So therefore, you should use that water, improving water quality. This is the issue. And I'm quite familiar with one of those discussions you had. And California, I think, is a good example of that. We had to be very careful about long-distance transport of water. And hopefully that using reclaimed water, because all of those municipalities in Spain now has a very good wastewater treatment facilities. So this is one of the success stories in Europe, I think. So therefore, if you can reclaim that water and use it for the beneficial purposes, such as the irrigation of the landscape, agriculture irrigation, industrial cooling is another important aspect. And if you want to go beyond that, it's a groundwater recharge, recharging groundwater with the purified water. And that is becoming groundwater, and you can use it for the possible portable reuse. So I would like to advocate this more efficient use of water resources, particularly with respect to the water reclamation, recycling, and reuse.
Señor Verde, había pedido la palabra, pero yo no sé si por la organización me podéis ayudar, si ya se puede dar paso a alguna pregunta.
Can we already give the floor to the audience? Yes, thank you. Well, I would like to make a comment. Of course, this leads us to the initial question about Copenhagen and what will happen there. To me, this is a historical point in time for mankind, because this debate about the climate change helps us reflect about many of those models which have been a complete failure. I'm referring to the financial Wall Street model or the model of consumption, responsible consumption habits. And of course, this type of conversations, and especially the decisions and the public policies which will be established after Copenhagen, might be a very good opportunity for mankind to reinvent ourselves, to become a much fairer and equitable society, but also a more efficient society with resources such as soil and water. And in this regard, I think we should be excited about this Copenhagen meeting, because it will be another opportunity for the scientific community to propose solutions, but also to have a series of issues that will unite us all. We don't have much time. There are many questions and very interesting ones. I cannot discard any of them. Therefore, I would like to ask everybody to be as brief as possible, and this way we will be able to give the floor to as many people as possible. I ask you, please, to be brief.
First question, and it won't take a second. Raise your hand. Who's cycling to work? Who's taking the bicycle to go to work? Riding a bicycle. Okay, that's a good percentage. Good percentage. Now, Professor Michel, you had presented, and there are some expectations. Tell us something, elaborate on your viewpoints. It is like people are saying that skeptical people are getting no margin for a debate. Do we have space for being skeptical regarding climate changes? Is there a space for that debate?
Depends what you ask for. There is no doubt that the climate change is real. There's no doubt at all. The question is, what is the cause for that? Yes? And we as scientists have to look at scientific as a controversial process, and I think the discussion will go on. And we had other examples like Waldsterben in Germany, which was 15 years ago, very big debate, and it died off.
Pero ese debate es realmente vivo.
This debate is still alive. Is there room for being skeptical? Because Mr. Green is insisting on that. People are saying that there is no possibility because there are robust scientific finding in only one direction, and there are no doubts about it. I think that doubt is healthy. I think doubt is part of a scientific process, but the IPCC is concluding that 90% of probability is there saying that climate change is a reality and this is due to human activities. So I am a business person and I assume 90% is a very high level of probabilities. We agree on the fact that climate change is here. It's a reality that we'll have to change what's not working properly. So I think that we agree on that. We agree on the fact that we have to go forward independently on a scientific debate about sources. And probably we are also in agreement that self-criticism is also positive. And Professor Socolow, would you comment on the business possibility of CO2 trade as an activity? What do you think about it?
Okay. Well, first let me say on dissent and lack of certainty. The point is to spend one's effort on the most important part of the problem. We don't know for sure, absolutely for sure, that human beings are responsible for climate change. We are nearly sure. We're not going to know much more than we know right now. It's for a long time. So it's not a productive place to spend one's time. You never act on perfect certainty. The second part of this is we are not sure how hard to work on climate change. There are other important problems, like world poverty. Some people are saying we can do one or the other. And that's where we get into trouble. We have to work on both. Does one interfere with the other? Well, almost not at all. Poor people can develop and have the beginnings of a decent standard of living, and it makes almost no difference for climate. So we can't say we've got one problem, we work on that first and then the other one. We have to work on them together. And then how much do we work all together? How much are we willing to let the carbon dioxide price affect how much we spend on energy? If we want to do it, we're pretending right now that it won't cost us very much. It's going to cost something. And for rich people, very little, and for poor people, more. And so we can protect poor people from the size of the change by giving them a different charge for the same consumption. We say the first 100 kilowatt hours a month of electricity is nearly free, and after that you start paying. We have many opportunities to set this problem right. As far as carbon dioxide capture trading, it's a very interesting idea that we put a single price, first of all at the level of an individual country, but maybe globally down the road, on carbon dioxide emissions. And then we have rules that make it expensive to emit more than a certain amount of carbon dioxide. You get a certain quota. If you're a power plant, maybe if you're a village, a town, you have a certain quota for all the carbon dioxide you can emit. And a penalty that has to go with it so that you have an incentive not to exceed that quota. If you have some good ideas for how to reduce energy in your particular place or carbon dioxide emissions, you do that and you get below your quota. Then you sell the extra carbon dioxide you could have emitted. You sell the right to emit that to somebody else who has a hard time reducing their carbon dioxide. Economists love that idea because overall it creates everyone looking for the cheapest possible answer. And it would work. It does work, for example, in the United States with sulfur dioxide emissions and 100 or so large coal power plants, which negotiate among themselves to find the cheapest way to reduce sulfur dioxide. It has been a big success. It started in 1990. There are other examples, include, I think, pollution on the Rhine River, which is pollution emissions, which are allocated according to, again, a cap and then trading under the cap. It's a promising idea.
Thank you very much. Señor...
Thank you. And Mr. Michel, we have ideas, biofuels as not efficient. Well, there are several questions about that, Mr. Harmut Michel, and people are concerned about the waste of time while tackling new technologies. And is it true? Can we catch up? Because there was time wasted there. And the use of second-generation biofuels, that's something that's going to be proposed in Denmark in a short while, what they do with hay as a source of biofuel that perhaps will solve problems of first-generation biofuels. Would you kindly elaborate on that?
Yes, the major problem is for biofuels that photosynthesis overall is a very inefficient process. So from the light capture down to fixation of carbon dioxide and the biomass production, an average plant, a good plant, a good tree, saves about 1% of the sun's energy in the biomass. And if then you try to convert that into electricity or biofuel, you have to invest, you have to transport over quite some distance, you have to collect the wood, and you have to do the conversion. And at the end, it's less than 0.1% of the energy of the sun, which is in the biofuel net. Even if you go to bioethanol production in Brazil, it's less than 0.2% of the sun's energy, which is in the bioethanol. And if you would convert this into electricity, then you lose. Then you have a conversion efficiency of about 30 to 35%. Then you lose another 2/3. And if you directly use photovoltaic cells, you have a commercial photovoltaic cells. You have an efficiency of about 15%. So you are already there by a factor of several hundred better. And if you, in my opinion, we cannot do much about improving photosynthesis. If we improve it by a factor of 2 or 3, we still are a factor of 50 or 70 below direct conversion of the photovoltaic cells. In my opinion, as long as we could stay electric, either from solar thermal energy conversion or from photovoltaic cells, we should do it and not go into conversions, because conversions into chemicals always go into a loss of energy. There's always a debate about hydrogen production. Even if you use solar energy to produce hydrogen by hydrolyzing water, then you lose 80% of the energy at the end. So staying electric is as long as you can. So also you should go for electric cars driven by electric batteries. And I mentioned already that an electric engine uses only 20% of the energy of the biofuel or of the gasoline for propelling the car. But if you stay electric, 80% of the energy stored in the battery is used for driving the car. So the much better overall energy consumption factor is taken together about 400, while the pure electric line is much better than going via biofuels. And even if then investing money into improving photosynthesis, maybe then it's a factor 200. So not much of a gain.
If I am asking myself, what's the most important thing we haven't discussed? And that would be forests. When we talk about biocarbon, think about biofuels is an example of bringing what grows, and the carbon is in every plant, every forest, every field, every grassland. There is as much carbon in the plants as there is in the atmosphere. And so how we treat what grows and how we treat fossil fuels and how we treat the atmosphere is one single problem. And you're right to be concerned that people are talking today about cutting down a forest in order to grow a fuel. And that makes absolutely no sense, because there's lots of carbon in the forest that would disappear into the atmosphere when you would do that. So we have to think about, and one of the cheapest ways of helping solve the climate problem is to make sure that we don't cut down forests anymore. And there are countries which have as part of their development plan that they would like to cut down those forests. So that becomes a part of what's going to be discussed at Copenhagen that's extremely important. How are we going to manage the world's remaining forests? And can we actually add to the forests that we have, reclaim land and build more forests? So the biocarbon, I think biofuels is a small part of a larger problem called biocarbon that is really part of the climate problem too.
Yes, shortly.
Let me just add, because a major danger is if you cut tropical rainforest, there is lots of peat in the soil. And the peat is no longer protected by the forest, it's oxidized by bacteria. And there are calculations or even experiments that it takes 450 years until the carbon dioxide is released by this peat degradation by the burning of forest until it's converted again into biofuel. So for the next 450 years, we will have increased the carbon dioxide by cutting rainforest and convert it into palm in the oil palm plantations.
Gracias. Bueno, yo creo que tenemos que terminar, lamentablemente. Hay muchas preguntas.
I think it's very interesting. We have to continue, and we have a delay, and of course it's almost 2, and then we have a lecture that should have started at 1:30. Thank you for your wonderful presentations. Thank you for the questions, and we can keep on with bilateral contacts at lunchtime. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Stay with us.